The drug kingpin Maserati Rick, who ran a multi-million-dollar crack cocaine and heroin empire on Detroit's east side. Maserati Rick was known across the country for driving flashy cars, wearing the finest clothes, and the most expensive jewelry, even hanging out with celebrities.
Money is the root of all evil. It turned us from gangbangers into full-fledged animals.
The 80s were just insane in Detroit.
Best Friends gang were the most bloodthirsty crime syndicate the city of Detroit had seen since Prohibition.
Detroit has, by far, the highest murder rate in the nation. About 2 murders a day.
White Boy Rick,
Boogaloo and Rockin' Reg.
Big Ed Hansard,
Maserati Rick.
Demetrius Holloway.
We all grew up together.
Guys doing business on Monday, we're at each other's throats on Tuesday.
You know, what Maserati Rick goes to the situation is the east side of Detroit, where he came from. The east side is the coldest motherfucking hood in the city of Detroit, period. And when you look at through the world, Detroit is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. So if you take the context of if Detroit is one of the most dangerous cities in the world, and then you got the east side, the most dangerous motherfuckers hood in Detroit, what that tell you? That's where this dude grew up from. That's where I'm come from, the east side, and it's dangerous in the motherfucker.
Didn't make it this time. Officials say 2 men were seen near his room when the shooting was discovered.
Really, we don't have a whole lot of details other than the fact that some people saw 2 men. Anybody can visit patients, and there was no restrictions on visiting this patient. There are sometimes restrictions imposed by patients or the police department, etc., and there were no restrictions on this patient.
This is the first time in the hospital's 50-year history there has been a shooting inside. Officials say after today, they plan to reevaluate their security measures. A family member who did not want to appear on camera said Carter was shot on Friday while washing his car. She said she spoke to him this morning on the telephone, and he said he couldn't identify who shot him.
Richard Carter, a.k.a. Maserati Rick, was born on July 31st, 1959 in Detroit, Michigan. To his mother, Betty Carter, his father wasn't around, so his mom raised him and his 3 brothers alone. Rick grew up on the east side, an area known for having a very violent reputation. But he was all about hustling and making money. Even when he was a kid, he would do whatever he had to do to make a dollar. Rick was good with electronics, and he would go around the neighborhood fixing broken TVs and VCRs for a fee. And if he wasn't doing that, he would be selling candy or mowing lawns. Rick had a love for boxing as well. He grew up a few houses down from boxing legend Thomas the Hitman Hearn, who many consider to be one of the greatest boxers ever. And he was also a part of some of the most legendary fights in boxing history. And his love of boxing would lead him to the legendary Kronk Gym, located in the Brewster Wheeler Recreation Center. It was the home of one of the greatest trainers in boxing history, Emanuel Stewart. Rick was talented in the ring, and as he entered his teen years, he was well known around the city as an amateur boxer. He was actually going by the name Pretty Ricky due to his good looks during this time. The name Maserati Rick would come later, but his love of the hustle and getting money would overtake his passion for boxing. And in the mid-70s, at about 16 years old, he joined a car theft ring. Hustling made Rick a good amount of money, enough money where he could help out his mom and younger siblings, and buy himself a gold 2-seater Mercedes-Benz by the time he was 18 years old. In 1979, he married his girlfriend Pansy, who he met while she was working at a McDonald's. He kept it low-key and didn't tell his family the news. They didn't even realize that he was married until his first daughter was born. He had a close friendship with Demetrius Holloway, a childhood friend who he came up with on the east side. But even though they were close, they always had a friendly rivalry. Demetrius went out and got a white Mercedes-Benz 300 Turbo that he called Ghost. And Demetrius was getting his due to his connections to some of the most deadly gangsters in Detroit history. People such as James Red Freeman and Frank Nitty Usher, who had ties to the Murder Row gang, a syndicate of the Detroit Italian Mafia, headed by mob boss Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, and he was rumored to be a part of the disappearance of Teamster President Jimmy Hoffa in 1975. Outside of his life of crime, Demetrius also had a job working as a postal clerk on the east side of Detroit. but in 1980 he would be arrested for interstate transferring of stolen goods and ultimately receive 5 years in prison. While Demetrius was away, things were changing for Rick. He divorced his first wife, Pansy, and started a new relationship with a woman named Tracy Cowan, who he would go on to have 2 children with. He also realized that he could make more money in the drug game than he could chopping up cars, so he made the transition from a car thief to a drug dealer. It said at first he was reluctant, but he seen all the money that people were getting and it was just too tempting. So he set up shop on the east side and started selling heroin. Rick was already popular and known throughout the city, so he already had the right contacts to make moves in the drug gang. This is also around the same time that he would get his nickname Maserati Rick, even though he was known for being a Mercedes-Benz man. Detroit is a place that's known for its style when it comes to clothes, accessories, and especially cars. So when Rick popped out with the latest model black and gold Maserati, becoming the youngest and the first black person in the city to have one, he became synonymous with the vehicle. Rick had a solid operation and was making good money in the heroin trade. But things were about to be taken to a whole nother level once his good friend Demetrius Holloway was released from prison. Because while he was away, things had changed for him as well. While he was locked up, he used his ties to the murderous gang to make connections in the drug world, and he landed the ultimate plug, one of the biggest drug dealers in Detroit's history, Eddie the Fat Man Jackson, who ran a multi-million-dollar operation along with his right-hand man, Courtney the Field Marshal Brown. Eddie went from making $3 an hour working at an auto plant to making $1 million a month on the streets of Detroit, amassing an empire that had multiple businesses and multiple homes that he owned in the Southfield area. And it said that prolific writer Donald Goins actually got some of his stories from the life of Eddie Jackson and Courtney Brown, to the point where they even had to pay him a visit because some of his stories were hitting too close to home. Even the local news media was curious about Eddie's fortune, asking him how he got so rich so fast.
Eddie Jackson was the biggest guy that Detroit or Michigan would ever see. And prior to the country, he may have been the 3rd or 4th biggest person in the United States that I knew, because I traveled all over.
It suggests that Eddie Jackson was the big man of dope, and that he lived, I believe, in a posh fortress is the term that the newspapers, and that Courtney Brown was his chief associate. After the newspaper frenzy then came the TV news frenzy, whether it was Bill Bonds or Mort Krim or Bob Bennett actually coming out to our houses and really trying to get to the bottom of how are these black men living so good, and where did all of this money come from?
You're under constant surveillance. There have been all kinds of stories about your alleged connections with the underworld drug market. What's your reaction, Mr. Jackson?
Well, as far as the connection, that's 100% false. And as far as the surveillance, I welcome, you understand, anybody who feel like they want to waste their time watching me.
Eddie took a liking to Demetrius, teaching him everything that he knew about the drug game and putting him in contact with a major Colombian distributor. And when Demetrius was released from prison, he purchased a pool hall on the east side. It was a front and a spot that he could use to run his drug operations out of. But there was only one problem. He had the plug, but he didn't have the connections. And this is where Maserati Rick would come into play. Demetrius didn't have the type of personality where he wanted to be on Front Street. He preferred to be in the cut and the shadows, but Maserati Rick loved the spotlight. When he walked into a room, he liked to let everybody know that Maserati Rick was in the building. His flashy appearance and outgoing personality made him one of the most well-connected people in the city. Rick's friendship with boxing champion Thomas the Hitman Hearns gave Demetrius access to a level of clientele he would have never been able to get next to without Rick. He made connections in the boxing industry with people like Sugar Ray Leonard and Don King. Having a way to mingle with high-profile individuals meant the potential for high-class clientele, people with a habit but got a lot of money to spend. But it wasn't just the high rollers that they were focused on. They were going after the entire drug market, and soon they would flood not just the city of Detroit, but the entire Midwest with cocaine. The major pickup locations was Indianapolis and Lima, Ohio, and it said that the Colombian plug that Eddie Jackson put Demetrius in touch with was giving him 1,000 keys a month. 640 of them he would have to sell and pay back, and the other 360 he could take and do as he pleased. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for Maserati Rick and Demetrius to go into business as a team. The new crack epidemic was spreading across America in the mid-'80s, from New York City to LA and everywhere in between. It was an uncontrollable epidemic, and Demetrius and Rick had the product.
And Eddie's father vouched for him, schooled him, gave him some mentorship, and he turned him on to the plug.
Did Eddie hook up Demetrius with the Colombians?
That I do believe to be the truth. The plug, you know, he definitely vouched for him, and it was told to me the connection that allowed him to really take over the town. He got that plug through Eddie. I've been told by very reliable sources that the arrangement was basically he got 1,000 keys at a time, and he had to pay for 660 of them. So that means 340 were on the house. They were giving him 1,000 bricks. He has his ticket is for 640 of the bricks. The other 360 are his.
This is around the same time that the movie Scarface came out, that influenced an entire generation to seek out money, power, and respect in the drug game, and to get it by any means necessary, even if you had to kill. There was an all-star cast of drug crews in the city of Detroit, with all of them trying to position themselves to dominate the drug trade in the city. And just like Scarface, some of them would inspire movies that would later hit the big screen. Like the Chambers Brothers organization, comprised of brothers Billy Joe, Larry, Willie, and Otis. They hailed from Marianna, Arkansas, and when they first arrived in the city of Detroit, they were viewed as country bumpkins. But after one of the brothers, Billy Joe, got a line on a plug, they became one of the biggest drug crews in the city. Their drug enterprise would inspire writer Barry Michael Cooper to write a screenplay based on their exploits. It inspired the movie New Jack City, with the murderous Nino Brown being portrayed by Wesley Snipes, and the infamous Carter apartments that were shown in the film was actually based off the Broadmoor apartment complex that the Chambers brothers ran in a similar fashion, basically having an open-air drug market inside the fortified apartment buildings. Another Detroit drug dealer who would inspire a major motion picture would be Rick Warshie, also known as White Boy Rick. He was considered an anomaly in the Detroit drug game, not just because he was white, but because he was only 14 years old when he started. It's said that his entry came from his father being an FBI informant, and the FBI then using his son to get information on the Detroit drug trade. Another prominent crew was the Curry Brothers organization, ran by brothers Johnny and Leo. White Boy Rick actually worked for them for a time before branching out on his own. The Curry brothers had political ties, with Johnny being married to Mayor Coleman Young's niece, Kathy, as well as their ties to the man who ran the Detroit Homicide Division, Gil Hill. It's said that not only would he give them heads up on investigations, he would also help them cover up murders. He famously played the role of Inspector Todd in the Beverly Hills Cop movie series starring Eddie Murphy. Then you had the feared and murderous Clifford Jones organization, known for doing hits and robbing drug dealers. They called themselves the Monster Squad and had a reputation for dressing up as police doing raids, but it was really a robbery. Their calling card was killing everybody in the home and leaving no witnesses. Then you had the Pony Down Gang, ran by brothers James Walter and Leroy Buttram, and whenever they would take over new territory, they would mark it with graffiti that say "I Pony Down." They had a fierce rivalry with another crew that was popular in the city, and the gang that they were at odds with was probably the most famous drug gang to ever come out of the city of Detroit, Young Boys Inc., YBI, led by people such as Dwayne Wonderful Wayne Davis, Raymond Baby Ray Peoples, Bernard Boykins, and the feared Milton Butch Jones. There was no doubt that YBI was making millions in the drug game, and even though they may not have had the most money in the city, they were by far the most popular, especially when it came to the younger generation. YBI had the streets.
The kids work in teams, one collecting the money, another delivering the dope, others acting as lookouts, and all are decoys for one another. And when a lookout throws a signal, a busy street can become deserted in a matter of seconds. That way, a cruising police officer sees nothing. As a result, Young Boys Incorporated has expanded into Pontiac, where police say the group has been connected with at least one murder.
The most notorious drug trafficking ring in Detroit history. At its height, Young Boys Incorporated, as the gang was known, was grossing $100,000 a day.
If a motherfucker would ask them, damn, who got it? Them young boys got it, because we was all little kids. Them young boys got it, so it just stuck.
A very powerful drug syndicate in 1978 that came to be known as YBI, or Young Boys Incorporated.
People who were around during that time said that Demetrius hit the streets of Detroit like a tidal wave. He went from being relatively unknown to being the biggest drug dealer in the city. But there were also other wholesale dealers who were supplying major organizations, such as Arthur Dale Derrick, who supplied people like White Boy Rick and the Chambers brothers. He was quoted as saying that Billy Joe could move cocaine like nobody he ever seen. Sylvester Seal Murray was also known as a kilo man pushing weight in the city. He was the main distributor for Butch Jones and YBI. There's no doubt that Art Derrick and Sylvester Seal Murray were big fish in Detroit, but law enforcement referred to Demetrius as a whale, and even though they were mostly moving cocaine, they were still getting money in the heroin business too. Demetrius owned both apartments on each side of Mack and Gray, and from just those two buildings alone, he could buy a kilo of China White for $1.80, mix it down and make $1 million off of it. Demetrius was a lot more low-key than his friend Maserati Rick, but that didn't mean that he still didn't live a lavish lifestyle. Demetrius had a private jet on standby and would frequently make trips to Las Vegas where he received the high roller treatment, losing millions and also winning millions. He once told White Boy Rick, who he did business with at times, that he had $10 million stashed away in another state that he didn't even touch.
You know, in the beginning, me and him fell out. And then we became cool because he used to mess with my son's mother. He told me one day, he was like, I said, B, he was like, man, he used to look out for me, you know what I'm saying, if I wanted something after we got cool or whatever. And he was like, yo, I got $10 million put up out of state. He said, I don't even touch it. Bro, that was dope back then. Wasn't born for no bullshit.
But even though Maserati Rick and Demetrius were making millions of dollars illegally selling drugs, they made sure to invest into legitimate businesses as well. Demetrius owned 3 sporting goods stores, as well as multiple properties in downtown Detroit that he leased out through his business Renter's Paradise, as well as a shoe store franchise called Sports Jam, which at a certain point in time he was in negotiations with Foot Locker about purchasing the franchise. Maserati Rick was also an astute businessman. He owned multiple car washes, hair salons, and restaurants, as well as numerous gas stations and pool halls. Maserati Rick and Demetrius didn't wear pony like the Pony Down Gang, and they didn't wear Adidas with top 10s and campaign hats like YBI. They wore furs, $20,000 suits, and gaiters. But even though they were childhood friends, according to well-respected Detroit defense attorney Steve Fishman, who represented both men, they couldn't have been any more different as people.
Maserati Rick was a good buddy of Demetrius's, but he was almost the polar opposite of Demetrius Holloway. Meech was a generous guy. You know, I think anybody that knew him. Rick, you know, if he told me it was raining outside, I might make plans to play golf. If he told me it was sunny, I'd probably go get my umbrella. Demetrius Holloway and Rick Carter, even though they were friends, were as different as two human beings could ever be. Demetrius Holloway, had he wanted to be, could have been a CEO of a major corporation. He never drank. He never smoked. He laughed at people who used drugs. He was smart as hell, and he was cunning in a good way and in a bad way.
But even though Maserati Rick was making tens of millions of dollars moving weight, he never lost his love for boxing. His younger brother Greg Carter was an aspiring boxer, so Rick funded his career and was even able to strike deals for his younger brother worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Rick was known for looking out for his loved ones and people that he grew up with in his neighborhood. On one hand, he was distributing the product that was helping to destroy the community, but on the back end, he looked out for everybody that he could. Rick also made sure to spoil the mother of 2 of his children, Tracy Cowan, keeping her dressed in designer clothes and the finest jewelry. Whenever they entered a room, all eyes were on them, and Rick loved every minute of it.
The drug kingpin, Maserati Rick, who ran a multi-million-dollar crack cocaine and heroin empire on Detroit's east side. Maserati Rick was known across the country for driving flashy cars, wearing the finest clothes, and the most expensive jewelry, even hanging out with celebrities.
But with success in the streets comes enemies, and Rick's enemy would be somebody that he never expected, another person that he knew growing up on the east side. Edward Hanser, aka Big Ed. He was once a customer of Maserati and Demetrius, but once he got his own California connect, he became a competitor. It's also said that they fell out because Maserati fronted Big Ed some kilos and he was never paid for it. Their beef would quickly turn to gunplay and multiple shootouts, with each man trying to take the other out. But eventually, Rick would hire one of the most dangerous hitmen in Detroit to help him take out Big Ed, Nate Boone Craft. He was a Vietnam Special Forces veteran, but when he returned home to Detroit, he became a hired gun, doing hits for $50,000 or more.
One of his friends said something, pissed me off, and he tried to step in and calm things down, but like I told him, you don't step up for no one unless you will accept the ass whooping that he's finna get. And he told, what you talking about? I said, you need to look behind you. Two of my friends was back there with their hands underneath the coat. I was like, yeah. We talked, he was telling me about himself, about what he do and so forth, and that he could get me down, put me down, but he would like to use me as a bodyguard.
Did he tell you his name?
Rick Carter. He said, you might have heard me, they call me Maserati.
But do you think it's that easy for any person to kill for money? Or do it take a certain type of mentality to be able to do it?
A certain mentality to kill and not let it bother you.
Mm-hmm.
You kill it, then at nighttime you thinking about what you did. You ain't meant for that life. Cause you're gonna always be worried, shaking, and then always nervous because somebody know you did it.
Yeah.
Not to mention, you pulled the trigger on this individual, now you thinking about, damn man, I ain't never seen so much blood shoot out, or I never seen a person's head come off like that. All depends on how you're doing it too. If you're using a knife, you better be used to blood.
Yeah.
Using the gun, well, you at a distance.
So doing your...
That's why there's a lot of dummies out here doing them, but they are having flashbacks. Me, I did mine. It was a business. It wasn't personal.
Boone got the drop on Big Ed and found one of the spots where he hung out at. He told Maserati Rick that he was about to go handle his problem. But the thing is, Maserati Rick wanted to be there too. He wanted to be in on the hit. But according to Boone, he tried to persuade him not to. Because in his opinion, Maserati Rick wasn't really built like that. He was a good dude at heart, not a shooter. They went to Big Ed's spot and laid down in the bushes, waiting for him to show. And when he finally came out, Boone was on his head, letting off multiple shots as he tried to get away and hop the gate. According to Boone, one of the bullets hit the hat that Big Ed was wearing and knocked it off his head. And the only thing that saved him is that one of his friends got in the line of fire. And Boone stated that he didn't kill people he wasn't paid to kill, but he did pick up the hat and wore it all over the east side for the next 2 weeks as a way to taunt Big Ed. Boone's nephew was Jimmy the Bruiser Denard of the well-respected 2020 Boys. He knew a crew of young shooters from the east side and felt like they would be a perfect match with Boone. They had already did a few hits for him, and he knew how deadly his uncle was. And even though they were a murder-for-hire gang, they called themselves the Best Friends. According to the FBI, they're considered one of the most murderous gangs in U.S. history, with well over 100 bodies. It's said that the founding members are brothers Gregory Ghost Brown, Ezra Wizard Brown, Reggie Rockin' Reg Brown, and Terrence Boogaloo Brown, as well as brothers Mark and Andre Patrick and Stacy Colbert, aka The Machine, which is short for The Killing Machine. Boone had entered a tough man competition that was taking place at Cobo Hall, and Bruiser brought the Best Friends to the event to make the connection. Demetrius and Maserati Rick had a well-respected drug organization in the streets, but they weren't known for being killers, although they could handle their business if need be, especially Demetrius. But he wanted to take care of the money and product and have somebody else do all the dirty work. Boone told Maserati Rick about the Best Friends, and him and Demetrius decided to hire them as enforcers, collecting drug debts and carrying out hits. The Best Friends even became a part of the hunt for Big Ed. And one night they went out with Maserati Rick and happened to see Big Ed in the same club. According to Boone, they almost started shooting on sight, but the club owner begged them not to. Big Ed and his homie tried to sneak out the club, but the Best Friends were on their trail, and a high-speed chase ensued. But lucky for Big Ed, he was able to escape with his life.
Ed had stepped in. Rick had said, man, that's that motherfucker right there, man. I don't like him. I said, so what's up? He told me, man, that's the one that they call Big Ed. He think he the shit. What you want? Pooh had stepped up and told me, yeah, man, that's that man. Let's take it to him. Like, right here? Rockin' Red was like, hell yeah.
Legend has it that the best friends came from the fact that when people saw them coming, they'd be like, oh, all those best friends, those guys are all coming to this club, coming to this spot, or coming to this part of the city, and they kind of just became known as the best friends.
The whole best friend crew was like a bodyguard just for them two.
I didn't hung with them niggas a couple times at the mall, and I sort of kind of on my shit at the same time, like, these niggas ain't no hoe. Well, come on, these my niggas, I'm with them. So shit, I'm cool. I'm probably about the safest nigga in the world at that point. But anybody else, oh, you catch it. The fuck you looking at? And you catch it.
But the best friends weren't just putting in work locally. They were doing hits all throughout the United States. There's a story of Demetrius taking one of his many trips to Las Vegas in his private jet, and this time he won big, well over $1 million. To celebrate, he took his private jet down to Miami, but while he was partying, somebody slipped a Mickey in his drink and knocked him unconscious. When he woke up, his money was gone, as well as his jewelry. As soon as he realized what happened, he got on the phone and called the best friends, and they were immediately on a plane headed down to South Beach. When they arrived, they tracked down the man who was responsible for setting up Meech and took him to a local basement where he was tied up. He was about to be murdered, but he told Meech that not only could he get his jewelry back, he could also get back all of his money. Meech didn't believe him, but the man screamed out a name that he knew. He told him to call a man named Huckabuck in Detroit, a hustler from the 60s and 70s who used to run with Eddie Jackson and Courtney Brown, and he had ties to Demetrius's old affiliates, the Murder Row Gang. He vouched for the man, and all of Demetrius's belongings were returned. And after getting everything settled, the best friends didn't have to kill anybody and just hopped back on a plane to Detroit. But the best friends were starting to get tired of just being enforcers and hitmen. They sat back and watched Demetrius and Maserati Rick make millions, and they wanted their own piece of the drug gang and all of the money that came along with it. They asked Demetrius to put them on, but he didn't feel like they were worthy to be a part of that side of the business. But Maserati Rick would sell to him, hitting him off with keys here and there, which Demetrius wasn't a fan of and told him that he shouldn't do it. But over time, Maserati Rick had grown close to the best friends and believed that they had a true brotherhood. This caused issues between him and Demetrius, and the childhood friends were no longer on speaking terms. Rick broke away and started doing his own thing in the drug game with the best friends, but they were still upset with Demetrius for dismissing them when they asked to get put on in the drug game and declare war on their old boss. But they underestimated how dangerous he was, forgetting that he came from Murder Row, and he was already making plans to get rid of the Brown brothers immediately. And on December 20th, 1986, Terrence Brown and Ezra Brown were sitting in a vehicle not too far from a Detroit police station when a gunman walked up and shot both men numerous times. Ezra died on the scene. Terrence was able to survive by stumbling to the nearby police station and throwing a brick through the window, alerting them of what happened. And just 1 week later, on December 27th, 1986, Gregory Ghost Brown had just finished attending his brother Ezra's funeral. Afterwards, he went to a spot on the east side called Pat's Lounge to have a few drinks. But when he stepped outside the club, he was immediately gunned down in front of everybody. And when he was gunned down, he was still wearing the suit that he had just buried his brother in.
I didn't really know much of anything about the best friends other than that they were supposed to be a bunch of killers on the east side. I didn't know they were called the best friends. I just knew they were some evil-looking guys.
By 1988, the one man standing in their way of taking over the cocaine and crack business in the city of Detroit was Demetrius Holloway.
Rockin' Reg and Boogaloo started killing anyone in sight that had any remote connection to Demetrius Holloway.
The open war did not come without consequences. The oldest brothers, Gregory, aka Ghost, and Ezra, aka Wizard, were gunned down in 1986.
The death of Ezra and Gregory did nothing to deter the two remaining brothers from killing anyone that stood in their way. In fact, it just seemed to light the fire that would rage out of control for the next several years.
Boogaloo and Rockin' Reg vowed that they would get revenge for their fallen brothers. But not just against Demetrius, against all of the drug dealers in Detroit. And the plan was simple. We're robbing everybody in the city that's moving weight and killing them if we have to. It was war and chaos in the streets of 1980s Detroit. And after getting paid big money by the Curry Brothers organization, a hit was put out on White Boy Rick, and the best friends tried to murder him on numerous occasions. It's said that the hit was put out because Johnny Curry found out that White Boy Rick was having an affair with his wife Kathy. He was able to dodge multiple attempts on his life, but one of his friends wouldn't be so lucky, because on September 21st, 1987, Patrick McLeod and Steve Roussel, aka Freaky Steve, were chilling at a home on the east side of Detroit when Rockin' Reg of the Best Friends kicked in the front door and shot both men with an Uzi. Steve Roussel would die on the scene. Patrick McLeod would survive his injuries. And ironically, Patrick McLeod was also the son of famous writer Donald Goins, who was killed alongside his wife in 1974 in their Highland Park home. Rockin' Reg would ultimately be convicted of killing Steve Roussel because Patrick McLeod was able to identify him. He thought that he was dead. Reggie would ultimately be convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison in April of 1988. This was a devastating blow to the Best Friends because Reggie was one of their most feared shooters. But the youngest Brown brother, Boogaloo, would keep their murderous ways alive, along with Stacy the Killer Machine Colbert, as well as Mark and Andre Patrick and the rest of the Best Friends. Maserati Rick needed the deadly Best Friends gang on his side now more than ever, because by the summer of 1988, Big Ed was still gunning for him, and he wasn't going to stop until Rick was dead. During the previous summer in '87, Maserati Rick and Big Ed had gotten into a shootout and Big Ed took a hit to the stomach. The feds came to him and told him that they know who shot him, and the only thing that they needed was for him to testify. But Big Ed told law enforcement that he would handle it himself. After being shot, Ed went down to Yazoo City, Mississippi to keep a low profile and stay out of the way of danger, as well as plotting his revenge against Maserati Rick. After recovering, Big Ed returned to Detroit and made multiple attempts on Maserati Rick's life. It's said that he left a note on one of Rick's cars that said, "I'm gonna get you, and if I don't get you, my son is gonna grow up and finish the job." He shot up Maserati Rick's mom's house, as well as his girlfriend, Tracy Cowan. Big Ed was only 5'6", but had a temper like Joe Pesci in Casino.
They would continue to trade cocaine with one another for several years with no problems, until greed took over.
Oh man, Big Ed was that's like Joe Pesci. You know what I'm saying? That's like Tim Roth. You know what I'm saying? Niggas know about the mobsters and shit, you know what I'm saying? He's like a strong arm, but he just don't do strong, he making money too.
The broken relationship between Demetrius and Maserati Rick continued to deteriorate, especially after Demetrius found out that Rick had introduced their Colombian plug to Terrence Boogaloo Brown. He had been pressuring Rick for months and he finally gave in. Maserati was under the impression that the Best Friends worked for him. But according to Nate Boonecraft, Terrence Boogaloo Brown resented this. He hated the fact that he had to go to Rick for money and product, so he secretly made plans to make a move on Rick and take over. On the night of September 9th, 1988, Maserati Rick was with Nate Boonecraft, who had been serving as his personal bodyguard protecting him against Big Ed. But according to Boone, on the morning of September 10th, he woke up to an empty house and Maserati Rick was gone. They had both agreed that he wouldn't go anywhere without Nate, so he was confused on why Rick ditched him. That's when he said that he turned on the TV and seen on the news that Maserati Rick had been shot at a car wash on the west side. His rival Big Ed had finally caught up to him, along with his bodyguard and hitman Lodrick Parker, another notorious Detroit killer. During the shootout, Rick was hit in the stomach but survived his wound. He was taken to Mount Carmel Mercy Hospital by the ambulance. Rick was visited by his crew, the Best Friends, but by the end of the night he would be dead. After a gunman snuck into his room, put a pillow over his face and shot him 7 times at point blank range. There are 2 theories when it comes to the death of Maserati Rick. One is that Big Ed's hitman Lodrick Parker came up to the hospital to finish the job, and he was arrested outside of the building dressed as a police officer in disguise. But according to Nate Boonecraft, it was Terrence Boogaloo Brown who decided to finally make his move on Rick by taking him out of the game so he can do business with the plug directly. His relationship with the Colombian drug lord had already been growing. They had carried out multiple hits throughout the United States for the cartel. in exchange for cheaper drug prices or just getting it for free in return for a murder. Boone also stated that Boogaloo said that they had to attend Maserati Rick's funeral to make it seem like they were still on his side even in death, and even if they were the reason that he was gone.
He was like, everybody gonna think that that jerk did it, man. So we clean on this. But we gotta go to the funeral though, dude. Make sure, you know, that people know that we there. We still bagging up Maseratis and life or death. As you seen on the DVD, which I didn't even know people was taking pictures of. That was like, if I did, I would have had my hood up.
The nature of Maserati Rick's death shocked the city of Detroit, and just days later, Demetrius Holloway was questioned by federal agents on how he accumulated all of his wealth. He told them that he gained it from gambling in Las Vegas and legitimate businesses, but he knew that that wouldn't hold up and the feds were on his trail. Terrence Boogaloo Brown still wanted revenge for the death of his two brothers, and the best friends were doing everything that they could to kill the $100 million man. Not too long after being visited by the feds, Demetrius would stage his own kidnapping in front of the Top Hat hamburger stand. He went missing for over a year. It's said that during this time he moved to Las Vegas and married Wanda Jean Hardaway, the sister of drug kingpin Charles Chucky Hardaway.
In November 1988, it seemed like Holloway's number was up.
He knows that he's a wanted man by both the best friends, the government, and possibly other forces at play.
So it's the Top Hat hamburger stand on Gratiot and 94, which was the epicenter of the East Side.
4 masked gunmen approached Holloway. In the chaos of the shootout, Holloway was grabbed.
He was thrown into a trunk and disappeared.
While Demetrius was in hiding laying low, the drug enterprise that Maserati Rick left behind was in complete turmoil. The Best Friends gang was looking to expand and take over every block that he once owned. In his absence, his brother Clyde Carter stepped up and took over. This would cause a drug war with the Best Friends that resulted in multiple shootouts and drive-bys. In the summer of 1990, the two rivaling factions called a meeting for a truce, but the meeting went completely left, and it resulted in even more bloodshed, with multiple bodies dropping on both sides. And eventually, Rick's brother Clyde Carter would become a victim of the drug wars as well. On September 17, 1990, he was shot to death, along with his girlfriend, as they exited his pickup truck with their 1-year-old child. But luckily, the baby was left unharmed.
They were these 4 6'3", 240-pound menace to societies.
The leader was the youngest brother, Terrence Brown, a.k.a. Boogaloo.
Terrence Brown wanted to take over all the territory. He wanted to be the exclusive person in Detroit to manage the drug business. Therefore, he had to eliminate his competition.
By late 1990, Demetrius had returned to Detroit, and he called up his lawyer Steve Fishman to let him know that he was back.
He organized his own disappearance and faked a kidnapping.
He was always thinking, and the disappearance, which it turned out to be, of course, was staged as a murder. And I don't think I ever believed he was murdered. I didn't know for sure until I got a phone call saying that this is the dead calling you. And in those days, this is before cell phones and numbers popping up. It just got a phone call in the office, and I picked up the phone and said hello. And it was Meech. I mean, I knew it was him. And he says, "This is the dead." And I just started laughing.
But it may have been a better idea for Demetrius to just remain in hiding and stay away from Detroit, because on October 8th, he was shot and killed inside the Broadway clothing store. He walked up to the cashier to pay for some polo socks that he was buying when a man came up behind him and shot him in the head. He never seen it coming. According to witnesses, as Demetrius's body fell to the ground, the gunman snapped his fingers and said, "That's that," and proceeded to casually stroll out of the store while whistling. Rumors ran wild in Detroit about who was responsible for killing the city's biggest kingpin. Some people said that the Best Friends had finally caught up to him, while others pointed at Big Ed's hitman Lodrick Parker, who would later be tried for the murder of Maserati Rick and the murder of Demetrius Holloway, but he was found innocent in both cases.
But his most feared enemies did not wear uniforms and badges.
What could have been Demetrius' downfall happened early on in his reign when he decided to start doing business with the Best Friends gang.
Police tonight refused to release the identity of the man found shot at the Broadway clothing store. But friends and relatives of Demetrius Holloway gathered quickly after word of the shooting spread through the city. This woman, who says she's Holloway's wife, could get little information.
And I still don't know if it's
Officers questioned Holloway's brothers about whether he carried a pager and what he was wearing today. If this is Holloway, this is the latest death in a bloody turf war being waged by the city's drug lords. At least 3 other alleged traffickers have been killed within the month. Holloway is a leader of the pack, and if he is dead, there is expected to be some serious shuffling among the ranks.
Is it true the day of Rick's murder you were picked up outside the hospital wearing a police uniform?
I don't like dressing up every now and then, you know what I'm saying? Disguise. You know what I'm saying? I like mingling. You know what I'm saying? I think I was going to a party. You know what I'm saying? You always got to be, that's how you do things. Nobody really know me.
It was later discovered that brothers Lester and Tommy Milton were the ones responsible for killing Demetrius. They were the top shooters for a man named Wayman World Benji Kincaid, who was also affiliated with Murder Row just like Demetrius, and they were actually cool once upon a time. But after having a dispute over drug territory, Benji put out a hit on Demetrius, ending the reign of one of the biggest drug dealers that the city of Detroit had ever seen. And although the name Meech is usually affiliated with Demetrius Flannery of BMF, it's said that Demetrius Holloway was the first and the original Big Meech. By 1991, Nate Boone Craft had been released from prison from his drug charges, because while he was locked up, his little brother was murdered, and he would later discover that Terrence Boogaloo Brown was responsible and had his little brother murdered over a drug debt. So Boone started working for the feds and agreed to gather information that would help take the Best Friends down. As soon as he got back with the Best Friends, Boogaloo asked him to go on a hit to kill a rival drug dealer with Stacy the Machine Colbert and Charles Chucky Doo Wilkes. They followed their target and saw him getting into a taxi, and that's when they decided to attack, killing not just him, but the taxi cab driver as well. But while the bullets were flying, Nate Boone Craft noticed that the 2 people who were with him turned their guns on him and shot him multiple times. But somehow he was able to survive the attack, although it left him disfigured for life.
I felt something push me in the back. My hand back then came back, it's full of blood. So I throw my hand back to get my gun. Chuck them fired off into me, tore all this up. I got a big hole there. They did all this shit to me. The AK went through here, ripped out that big bone. I lost a piece of bone. That's why my arm don't straighten up. That bone was missing. The dog ran off with the ambulance and the police said. But which car tried to shoot me in the face?
One time when we were trying the Best Friends guys, there was 8 defendants in front of Judge Cohn federal court. And Nate was a witness for the government. So what you were talking about before, does it mean he's a snitch? I don't know. He was a witness for the government. He pointed at some of the defendants and said they participated in homicides because there was drugs too, but a lot of it was just plain old murder because they killed a lot of people.
In February of 1992, Rockin' Reg was miraculously released from prison despite being convicted of murder. It's said that his brother Terrence Boogaloo Brown paid off the right people to get his brother out on a trial bond, as well as the judge requesting a new trial for his case. But just 1 month later, the Michigan courts would overturn this decision. But by now it was too late. He was already back on the streets of Detroit, and he was on a killing spree. As the feds continued to zero in on the Best Friends organization, certain members had decided to start working with law enforcement. So Terrence and Rockin' Reg felt like the best way to keep him quiet was to have him murdered. And on March 9th, 1992, Rockin' Reg walked up to a house located on Buckingham Street on the east side. He was hunting for a man named Alfred Chip Austin, who had turned informant on the Best Friends after he was caught with weapons down in Kentucky. And as he sat in the front yard hanging out with his friends, Rockin' Reg walked up with an Uzi and opened fire on everybody who was outside, killing 4 people in total, including Lawrence Gainey, Harry Roper, and a 1-year-old little girl named Lori Roper, who was Harry's niece. There were multiple witnesses who identified Rockin' Reg as the shooter. A murder warrant was issued for his arrest, and now he was really on the run.
The second youngest, Reginald, aka Rockin' Reg, was the group's head enforcer.
Boogaloo was the brains and Rockin' Reg was the brawn. Anyone who got in their way got killed. I mean, point blank.
By this time, the Best Friends drug network had expanded to places like West Virginia, Indiana, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and New York City. And that's where him and his brother Boogaloo decided to go on the run, New York City, to lay low for a while until the feds were off their trail. But even though they did the best they could to stay low, they couldn't hide from law enforcement forever. The feds had been tapping their phone calls, and they were following the brothers' every move. On June 17, 1993, Rockin' Reg and Boogaloo decided to go to a Mercedes-Benz dealership in Manhattan to buy a new car. And this is when the feds would finally make their move. They caught Rockin' Reg off guard and arrested him as he was trying to enter his new vehicle. And like a scene straight out of a movie, his brother Boogaloo hopped on a motorcycle and took the police on a high-speed chase through Manhattan. Eventually, he crashed and ran into a subway, blending in with the crowd and once again disappearing. The cops wouldn't get eyes on Boogaloo again for another 2 months, but by the time they caught up to him, he was already dead. At 1 a.m. on August 9, 1993, Boogaloo's body was found down in Atlanta in the back of a GMC Yukon that had been stolen from Michigan. He was bound and gagged, wrapped up in his polo bed sheets and plastic, and he had died from a single gunshot wound to the head. It was later discovered that he was killed by other members of the Best Friends who had grown scared of Boogaloo because he had grown paranoid and started killing off so many other members, so they decided to take him out before he turned on them. According to the 2 individuals responsible, Stacy the Killer Machine Colbert and Charles Chucky Doo Wilkes, the final straw came when they seen Boogaloo kill Jimmy the Bruiser Denard when they were on the run together. And Boogaloo's death would mark the end of the Best Friends, one of the most murderous gangs in U.S. history. All of the high-profile gangsters from the 1980s Detroit drug world would all meet similar fates, either decades in prison or 6 feet underground. And in the end, there are really no winners in this deadly game of destruction. And according to Steve Fishman, the game will never be how it was in the 1980s, and the game is truly over forever.
And quite frankly, the kind of guys that I represented all those years, they don't really exist anymore. A lot of these guys in the streets are different. You know, they want to do all the stuff they want to do, but a lot of them don't want to take the consequences. They think they're entitled to go home all the time, even though they're doing a lot of things that keep you from going home all the time. The guys in the older days, the guys who were involved, they knew there were things that happen when you're involved. You pay lawyers. Sometimes you take a plea or you get convicted and then you go to jail. They could take it. These young guys can't.
Richard Carter Jr. comes to Elmwood Cemetery about once a month to visit the grave of his father, the drug kingpin Maserati Rick, who ran a multi-million-dollar crack cocaine and heroin empire on Detroit's east side. Maserati Rick was known across the country for driving flashy cars, wearing the finest clothes, and the most expensive jewelry, even hanging out with celebrities. So it's ironic that he has such a plain-looking grave marker for a man who police say amassed millions of dollars. It's even more ironic when you consider that underneath this simple headstone is this, a $16,000 silver coffin built like a Mercedes-Benz, complete with spinning wheels.
Childhood friends Maserati Rick and Demetrius Holloway ran the city of Detroit for a time, but unfortunately they would both meet the same tragic end. And Maserati Rick, he was only 29 years old when he died. Rest in peace.